Good morning, everyone. Today we are painting Japan. So we are here in Tanegashima Island. We are doing a little digital trip using Google Earth all the way across Japan from Yakushima Island all the way up. And we're in Tanegashima Island. We are second stop along the way and enjoying every minute of it. So thank you for joining. I'm really glad that you're here. And this is where we are. So this is what we got to last week. There's a bunch of stuff going on. And what we did, instead of just getting things straight from Google Earth, I decided that there was a piece that I already wanted to work on. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it, but I liked the feel of it. And so kind of behind all of this paint is this relatively abstract piece that I wanted to work on. So I brought it along, and I do what I often do with some of the things that I'm painting, which is just to pick it up and take it outside, or in this case, take it to Google Earth. So we found this beautiful place over in Yakushima Island. There's this little kid, cheesy grin right there. Love it. This beautiful place with this massive rock, really fun thing. And so I decided I'm going to take that big rock, take some of the qualities that I find in this particular painting, and transfer them across. So that's what we've got here to begin with, this massive rock. Mills says, "Is that Dope Man Justin?" Oh, well, thank you. Good to see you, Mills. But yeah, so here we are. This massive rock, lots of really good things that I want to add. So let's start talking about some of the things that I want to add. First of all, this rock has some really nice textures down here. I'm just going to pick up and transfer right across. All this little mold and moss. Second with these trees and these beautiful roots down here. Just looking super fine. Third is this piece. This tree that's basically welded in. I have a tree, this one up here, that's kind of holding that position. You know, it's welded in. It feels like it's attached to the rock. So I really like that. And then I need to start adding more of this foliage in. That's basically, we don't have any foliage here just yet at the moment. So I'm going to be looking at some of this, but mostly this stuff right here. I'm not sure if it communicates well across on such small part of your screen, but it's just really, really nice. So we're going to take it and see what we can do. So let's have a look. Just overall, see what's going on. So one of the main things that I know that I wanted to do to begin with is start to add a little bit of our darkest darks, pull in some of those shadows, and basically here, up here and down here is going to be some of our darkest darks along this horizontal line. And I think a lot of our interest is going to be along here and then coming across up here. And then I'm going to do whatever I can to kind of subtly pull you back around over here when I can. So feel free to ask any questions if any of you have any. A rabbit says, "Do you recommend using black in gouache paintings?" You know what? There's this stigma against using black, which I don't think needs to exist. So most people, art teachers, will tell you that you should avoid black. What they're really trying to say is that you should try and imbue as much color identity into your darks as you can. And so a lot of people try to use black as a shortcut just to getting darker, something darker. But there's always better ways to do it. If you think about color temperature, you can make something darker by putting a darker warm in, and then you're getting darker and warmer at the same time. And so there's a lot more things that you can do. But in saying that you should never use black, then they're kind of just, ripping you off of one avenue of a thing that you can use. So yeah, I recommend using black. I also recommend doing everything to maintain a color identity if you can. Some gouaches, some these poster colors that I use, a lot of them are really, they're just in this thin band of mid-range, which means that just adding another color to it isn't always going to do the trick for making it darker. So there's a certain degree of the aesthetic that I end up with that comes from using black. But generally the idea is always try to keep a color identity to your paintings, to your darkness, where you can. But yeah, lots of good stuff to think about there. So we're going to come in straight off the bat, I'm going to try not to get stuck in details, even though kind of the point of this session today is detailing. I'm really going to try and be bold, because we can always fix things up if we ruin and destroy them. Lots of fun. So, let's have a look. So there's lots of really good root systems up here. And that I want it to feel like this whole thing is just like entangled. Beautifully entangled. Here we go. Nice stuff. I'm going to make sure I'm actually seeing everything. That you guys are seeing everything. So, feel free to ask any questions if you have any. I'm here to enjoy hanging out with you guys and paint. I gotta make sure everything's up. There we go. So, this is where we're at. So one of the interesting things about using such a cooled down color palette here is adding, when I have so many blues, you know, it's tempting to try and add yellows and oranges to try and cool it off. And oranges may work very well, but when I'm using so much blue, it's using reds that's really going to do the trick of cooling this off in a way that works with the palette that I'm using. So that's always interesting. Moat says, you planning to darken the painting? Really looking forward to seeing what you do with it. Yeah, some degree of it. Some part of it. I'm planning on darkening. Here. I can see that. Oh, first of all, this froze for just a sec. Okay, there we go. I can see this. I'm trying to get the shine off of some of this wet spots. So you know what? Maybe I'm just gonna do that for now. Maybe not. Amy says, "Hey Justin, how are you today?" I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. It's alright. I think there's gonna be. I'm gonna try and find a better way to light this thing. Nope, it's not gonna work. And you know what? I think that's okay. There we go. Just for a second, we'll do this. Oh, Loroyla says hi. Hi. Decent Radical says, bro, you can't hate a color just because it's black. Whoa. He took it there. Is this aquarella or gouache? This is poster color. This is poster color. It started off actually using watercolor and past colors, but I've been using poster color to just play with it, check it out. If anyone is not getting, if I'm not answering any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm not sure that my thing is telling me everyone's questions, but yeah. Rolla says it's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So one other thing I did between last time and this time was to take this tree here and carve it down across here. Lorella says, I follow you on Twitter. Thank you. Well, thanks for joining today. Yeah, but to get a little more movement here, I realized that kind of when I first started, there was a lot more of this out and up movement, which I really enjoyed. I think I wanted that to begin with. And I had lost it in translation somewhere along the lines. So I just put a second in earlier and curved up this tree again, which is great. But it also means that as it rolls down, it's going to get a lot more shadow underneath it, which I think is going to be interesting. There we go. So I'm going to make it darker. I think in some areas I'm going to make it lighter as well. I'm just going to be figuring out the overall composition. Now that I have like a basic relationship for what everything is, I can start to like push it in and pull it out and get a better feel for how I want it to be acting and reacting. And so yeah, I'm in this kind of sporadic stage where I'm really looking everywhere. I'm trying to get a feel for everything that I'm doing. As we try to like get the whole composition into a place that feels nice. So I want something in down here. So last week I was talking a lot about moving and transitioning your eye up through this section here. And I think that's still really true. So I want to sort of articulate some of the stuff that's going on over here to try and get that to happen. And one thing that I know that I don't want, that I just wasn't aware of last week, was you kind of have these rhythms in the painting, these ideas that you never quite want things to parallel each other exactly. It looks artificial, or it feels wrong most of the time. And so we have these kind of roots that come in down here, and they're basically the same size. They're doing the same thing. They're moving in the same direction. And it makes it feel very man-made or just wrong. So we're going to come in here and I think while we're at it, I'm going to try and put a little more color and interest in this area to get your attention. But basically, I'm breaking up a lot of the shape that I did have. Lorola says, I can watch you material, please, in this moment? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Do you mean you want to see the... Here, I think I've got the paint while I'm mixing. It's a bit far away. I know eventually I need to set it up so that I can, like, hit over to a palette cam. Here we go. So I'm going to, just for a second, stop thinking about exactly what is going on there. I'm going to just put in color, let the paint start to do its own thing, and then I'm going to use what the paint does to decide what the tree is doing, just for a way of like kind of breaking it up and trying to figure out what's going on. Take the pressure off of me a little bit for a minute. Adriana says, hello. Hello. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're finishing up this piece. So to do this, I'm pulling in some greens. I think I've got a Viridian green and a permanent yellow that I'm mixing together. But I'm also pulling in the main blue that's kind of the blue of this whole thing to tint it all, to get it to look and feel like it's a part of all this place. Here we go. So I think this is good. I think this will help us to have something that's a lot more interesting than those like basic 3 or 4 roots that were doing exactly the same thing the whole time. Adriana says, this looks great. Lots of depth. Thank you. Thank you. Lovely textures. I'm trying to make sure that I don't destroy those textures. I know that I had a lot of textures to begin with, especially. And I'm trying to just not to destroy them. But I have to add things, so it's always this back and forth between everything. Lorola says, when did you start for the first time? I've sort of drawn and painted my whole life. I'm going to see if I can actually get a little palette cam there. Okay. Now you can see when I'm mixing things. So I've drawn and painted my whole life, but I kind of really started properly about 8 years ago. And yeah, I kind of started trying to do my own thing, or at least to be independent 3 years ago, and really do my own thing last year, where I'd kind of really figured out what it is that I want to do. Bear Butts is hilarious. Says, can you glaze with poster color in a way that you can't with gouache? I don't think so. I think basically you can glaze with poster color in the way that you can with gouache. Gouache you can. It's just not quite going to be a strength of it in the way that it's a strength of watercolors. But I do glaze relatively often. To some degree or another, like you can always sort of go between working opaquely and working transparently. You're always somewhere in that spectrum. And so whenever you're working transparently, if there's something already down, depending on where it's at, you're kind of in glaze mode somewhere along the lines. But it's always interesting to play with that line. Where's that line with how kind of transparent you're putting the paint down and how wet is the stuff already is. Rainism says, wow, I love this. This looks digital. I promise it's not. But thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, gouache and poster color have this very opaque, kind of very, you put it down and the paint is like down and solid and opaque, and that sometimes feels digital. It does have that kind of thing going for it. So everything's kind of reflecting the light. Gotta move around a little bit to try and get my head so I can see it all. Okay, so that's nice. Getting a little more color into that tree. I think that's helping the whole thing. Boom. Okay. Amy says, I look away for a few minutes and all of a sudden there's light in your painting. Yeah, there is. Bam. Rainism says, can you teach the basics of watercolor? Eventually I'll be doing a basics of gouache and poster color. It might be a while before I do any basics of watercolor. I am a part of a watercolor summit We're doing a watercolor summit in later this year. So if you're on Twitter, if you go to the link in my bio and then hit watercolor summit, there is an event essentially that's going on later on in the year where there's 7 watercolor teachers, and myself included, and then we'll be going through a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're interested in learning the basics of watercolor, I recommend you actually go have a look at that. That's definitely what that's all about. But as for me, myself, I'm not going to be doing much other than that for learning the basics of watercolor. I will be doing a basics of landscape a little later on in the year, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, so lots of interesting stuff going on this year. Right now, putting a bunch of highlights in just to get the ball rolling. Dragon X Rose is now following. Thank you. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for following. Okay. So I'm going to be brave and just start doing a little more. Amy says, how do you choose what colors to use for light? I always find that I use something that seems too white or too yellow or too bright in general. And Moody says, nice, thank you. How do I find what colors I use for light? Well, the first thing I think of is the value, actually, instead of the color. I think that's always a better place to start thinking. And it avoids a big trap. You know, it's a bit of a trap to try to think solely in hues. So that's the first thing that I do. And then I tend to think in color temperature rather than like basic color. So if I'm going down for this moss here, right, I'm thinking about layering it. So I put down this first layer and it's pretty warm. And so it's essentially going to be the warmth that's shining through, but the light is going to be cool. So I'm putting down this warm green, and I'm deciding it's warm. I'm kind of picking some of my basic colors here. The color that's sort of pervading everything, right? Some of my cooler green, some yellow because I want it to be warm, and then I put it down, and then the next time round I'm thinking about a lot of value, so it's going to be it's going to have a little more white into it. Going to have a little more of the blue involved because it's going to be warmer. Basically the same thing. It's not going to have quite as much yellow in it, and it's going to be lighter, and then I'm going to put it on top. But yeah, lots of really cool stuff. That's how I think about it in general, and then I try to build up an intuition about it, which essentially just means that like spend a lot of time thinking about it to the point where it's no longer something I have to think about. I'm just doing. Rainism says, how do you make it feel like this is so opaque? I mean, my watercolor is so transparent because this isn't actually watercolor. This is poster color, and you can use gouache and come up with the same effect. But yeah, that's how it's so opaque. Amashatha says, hello to my fave artist. Oh, you're so kind. Hello. How are you doing? How are you doing? Moody says, I like it really. Thank you. Okay, so now I have a cooler green. I'm going to lighten it up a bit. And put it down. Okay, Amy says, thank you for the explanation. Do you usually start with a drawing on your paintings, or do you just start painting? Most of the time, I mean, it depends on what I'm doing. Most of the time, I just start painting. Some of the times, that's because I've already drawn it. Or some of the time, it's because I'm starting by copying what I see in front of me. Like if I'm out doing painting out in the wild, plein air stuff, it's kind of already drawn right in front of me, you know? So that makes it nice and easy. If there's heavy architecture, I'll come in and do that first. Sometimes I'll just do a little guideline with where I want things to go, using paint often. When I'm practicing drawing, I actually use a brush pen, and my logic is that most of what I do all the time is with a brush. So for me to learn to draw, I may as well learn to draw with a brush, and that way when it comes to painting, I can paint with a brush, and do all the drawing part of it kind of with a brush already there, and not have to learn new skills or transfer things. For me, just not having to acquire extra skills is nice. Though I like acquiring skills, but, you know, consolidating my time. Okay. So that's good. That's good, that's good. So one thing about moss is like velvet, in that the lightest area of the moss is always kind of this edge section. So if I want to start articulating some edges in this little moss section, I can kind of just go around and basically outline it in many ways. Outline it as it goes away from the middle of my vision, which is fun. So I'm just thinking about fun shapes. Thinking that this whole thing is just like mound upon mound upon mound of just moss. I was about to say creamy moss, but there's nothing creamy about moss, is there? Just fun. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm a shot that says, don't you think the gouache color is a bit thicker than poster? Yeah, when it first comes in, it is. And by that I mean like when I get the bottle of it, it's definitely thicker, and the poster color is definitely thinner. But I always transfer my poster color to over here into this stuff, and it dries out. And after a couple of days of not using it, it's basically a cake, or a little cake, like completely dry. And obviously I'll wet it before I use it, but that means for me, when I'm using it in everyday practice, it's really thick, and then I can just apply water to thin it out, and then I have a full spectrum of thick or thin. Umi says, hello, how are you? I'm doing good, how are you? Bearbutts says, does poster color dry closer to what you see on the palette, or does it change like gouache does? It changes wonderfully and horrendously like gouache does. It's just one of the things you gotta, I don't know, just gotta figure out how to deal with it. And so I try to be positive about it. I try to think that it means that I can create something, and then it all kind of, you know, changes color a little closer into the mid-range. So it's a way to get more subtle in the mid-range. That's how I think about it. Lovely says, hello, how are you doing? I'm doing decently. Bit of a hard morning, but we're here. We made it. How are you doing? Athe Fish says, cat eyes. Thank you. Umi says, I'm good, but I missed the first live. Oh, it's alright. There's more to come. Always more to come. Dariel says, I've heard that the color shift is due to the transition from shiny to wet to matte when dry. Absolutely. Have you heard this as well? Or is it just an internet rumor? No, that's exactly how it happens. Exactly the reason for it. It's called total internal reflection. So when something is wet, the light goes in and then reflects like it normally does, comes up, hits the inner surface of the water, and then part of it will go through and part of it will refract off and then hit and scatter again. What that means is that there's less light coming to your eyes, which makes it look darker. So when it dries, all the darks just get lighter, and then some of the lights get darker. It's unfortunate, but it's just part of the deal. Ima says, I don't know why a lot of people think it's good for beginners to use oil instead of acrylic. I began with oil, and it was fun. I actually really enjoyed that process. I'm not sure that there's actually any particular is better than anything else. I think it's more like, do you learn music on a guitar or do you learn music on a piano? And when you talk to people who have learnt music on a guitar, they always think a guitar is easier than a piano. And people who have learnt music on a piano always think that piano is easier than a guitar. I think it ends up kind of being a little bit like that. Ethereal says, thank you for the technical explanation. Umi says, got a question, when will you post the rock tutorial? Honestly, it is sitting ready. I'll probably post it next week. The reason is that I just have a lot of stuff that I'm trying to... I have this watercolor summit that I'm trying to market and push and kind of have a clear voice about. And I hate marketing like 3 or 4 things at a time, and that's what I feel like. So I'm kind of just holding off on the rock thing. If you're welcome to, you can send me a message. That's what I'll tell you. You can send me a message if you want. We can sort something out. Adriana says, oil is much more forgiving. In many ways it is. In many ways it is. In some ways it actually it's not. You gotta learn how to ask for forgiveness in the various ways. Because I used to think that oil was more forgiving than this as well. And then nowadays I'm like, oh, actually I think this is a little more forgiving. Or at least it forgives you quicker. Adriana says, as a guitar player, I have to say learning on piano is much easier. Well, there you go. Breaking my arguments, but oh well. Margaret says, what brand of gouache are you using? Do you find difference in the brands? I'm using Poster Color. This is actually called Nika Poster Color. And honestly, I don't find a great deal of difference between brands. I'm sure there is, and I haven't done a exhaustive study of different brands side by side. But just for me, experientially, I don't find a great deal of difference, which I think is actually kind of that's a nice thing. And some of you guys probably know better than I. So pulling some lights in here, which I think is actually probably a really good time for it right now. And evaluating a bunch of this stuff. Here we go. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking more about. Okay, let's see if I can get in closer to this area. I'm really actually thinking more about how to make interesting patterns than I'm thinking about what is underneath. Like, I know generally I want it to look like it's moving up But yeah, it's interesting trying to figure out that the difference, where I should be thinking about objects and what they do, and where I should be thinking about abstractly what is a nicer shape, or what am I trying to communicate. Alright, so we're going to hit up that guy all the way up here. Get some nice stuff going. So this point is like, I know what's happening with these roots, and I'm doing what I normally think of as like an action and reaction kind of thing. Like, okay, so here's a root. What kind of reactions are to it? So there's going to be the light that comes from the top. There's going to be the movement of the light as it goes around the form, and the shadow as it drops. And so it's kind of, I'm at the point of just processing through the action and reaction kind of stuff from it. Adriano says, my view is that playing the piano is much harder, but learning the basics is harder on guitar. I hear that. Piano's all laid out for you in learning everything. I had a guitarist friend tell me he always thought it was harder. I actually don't know why he thought it was harder. But I always thought it was harder to learn on guitar because you can have the same note in various places. Umi says, I'll wait for it. Take your time. I just want to buy it with some of the others as a set. I see what you're saying. So you're thinking about setting it up as like a nature set, for example, and being able to buy them all together. It's probably a good idea. I think it's probably about time for that. So I'm wetting some of my paints. I see that some of it's all dry. I'm wetting up, making sure it's the right kind of consistency for what I'm wanting to do. So I'm using black, blue, and a little bit of red because I know that I'm going to be dealing with these shadows and I want them to be warmer. Alright, so this is kind of nice. Kind of nice. It's these little details that, they're not new or marvelous or kind of, there's nothing special about them. But when you come in, you start to deal in some of these smaller details. It's just helpful, I think. Flaming Galah says, hi Justin, this paint's coming along beautifully. Thank you. I appreciate that. Bearbot says, what are your favorite types of brushes for watercolor gouache? I've got a mix of watercolor and all-purpose, and I can't decide which I like more. My favorite single brush is a calligraphy brush, which is kind of like a round brush, but it ends up having kind of a bigger body, so it holds more water, so you can do really big strokes, but then it has a really fine tip, so you can do little details. But that's it's relatively Eastern tradition brush. The Western tradition brush that's fairly similar is, I think it's called like a squirrel tail. And so those are really nice. They hold the water, they hold the pigment, and it works out pretty well in the end. When I'm doing big gradients, I'll use here we go. I'll use this one, which is just basic flat. There's nothing particularly watercolory about it. In fact, there's nothing particularly special about it either. I haven't gotten to a point where I can really afford to put a whole bunch of money into brushes, because I'm generally of the mindset that my materials that I'm using are not always super important. I'd much rather train my mind than my materials. Though it doesn't have to be an either or, obviously. Bearbot says, oh, I think I should get a whole bunch of stuff all at once. No, okay. Bearbot says, if it works, it works. Do you like to use larger brushes to block in as much as possible before going smaller? Yeah, and every time I find myself getting stuck into details that I don't want to get stuck into, I will revert to a bigger brush for exactly that reason. Adriana says, Da Vinci has a synthetic quill called Casaneo that's absolutely amazing and it's cheap. That is awesome. Yeah, quill brushes, that's what they're called. I do really enjoy quill brushes. Though I don't have any in my vocabulary currently. I had one, but it ended up getting varnish on it. Absolutely destroyed it. So that sucks. I'll get back around to it one day, but I don't have one at the moment. Alright, let's have a look. To define the edge of this tree a little bit more. In fact, if I can try and give it that same movement that this tree has, I think that would be really, really nice. Umi says, yep. And since I live in France, my bank is going to find me the currency exchange, so I prefer buying the tutorials together. Oh, got it. I hear you. I think that's a great idea. I will do that for you. All right. So we're going to give it the same sort of banking to the side feeling as the other one. Though it's a little more subtle than the other one, but I feel like having that harmony between them is really nice. Oh, just bumped my camera. Alright, so that's cool. Got that going. Let's see, now is one of those times to take a step back, see if I'm getting too stuck into details. I think that's the level of detail I want, at least for now. Not necessarily to finish it, but for here and now, that's where I need it to be. So let's have a look. Let's grab that step back. Adriana says, I quite enjoyed the gouache and post color tutorial. The learning curve is real. It is real. If you have any questions from that, go ahead and send me any questions. I think eventually I'm going to be doing a question and answer for kind of everything that I've done so far. Make sure I'm keeping things up to date as I'm learning and as I'm learning how to communicate and as I'm learning the needs of everyone. So yeah, if that left you with more questions, send me a message. But that learning curve is real. Like I said in that video, I really didn't like gouache, or really even poster color when I first. Well, by the time I got to poster color, I was committed to it, but I didn't like it when I first started. Because of that learning curve. All right, I'm seeing here's what I think my need is. Is this fade out on the tree on the side. I think I can easily make that a little more solid, as well as bring in just enough little texture from the darkness into this light to make it feel like it has the detail it needs. So I'm gonna hit up a nice big flat brush. Again, like mixing my color and then making sure I have that blue in there. But you know what? Also a little bit of red, because this is the shadow. Alright. This is going to be good. This is good. I think this is what it needs. So I'm thinking generally about the way the bark, normally comes down the tree and splits and moves and everything, and really fun stuff. And it's got the moss over it, so the moss is going to soften it up, but you'll still have some areas where it's pretty solid. Mills says this looks awesome, Justin Delsonot. Thank you, thanks Mills. There we go. I think that's working. That's what we need. Okay, we kind of come to obscurity down when we hit this really ambiguous stuff. Bear says, do you prefer a limited palette, or do you like having a lot of choices for paint colors? I like having... It depends on what I'm doing. It depends on what I'm doing. I find actually like having a limited color palette it's a quicker way to paint, because it just takes out a bunch of the decision-making process. I mean, you're still making decisions, but you don't go down this like forever splitting path of like, okay, I need red, but do I need CAD red or this red or that red or that red? Or it's just so you just like, you're getting your head into this spot where you're not constantly splitting your decisions. You can kind of just consolidate your decision-making process into a smaller place, which is very useful. So it's nice in that regard. I honestly haven't done much playing with different color palettes, so this is one of my most reduced color palettes that I've actually ever painted with. I'm enjoying it so far. I think it just like brings out the mood a lot more. Bearbot says, that makes sense. Probably fixes your color mixing muscles a bit more too. It flexes them. Yeah. Yeah, I think it builds your color mixing muscles, because suddenly you are kind of learning the fine details of this color or that color, and then the next time that you need to make a decision, you don't always need to work for another color to find out what you really need. Meredith says, how long have you been using this reduced palette? So not this one, but this one. This is the first painting that I've really done with it. But the one that I'm currently using, just in my everyday life, I had a version of it that I was using for probably about a year, and then I went to a convention, an illustrators convention, and got some really good advice. So I changed it up. That was a fair number of months ago now. So I've been using this particular one for some months. Okay. So we've got that. So let's actually start to get into this rock, which we got right here. Let's get into it. We really didn't use any details last time. So what I really want is to get some of these like little growth sections going. I think that's where some of the fun is going to be. So as I'm thinking about that, like in the local color, it's probably white or probably, ooh, let's switch this for a minute. This thing tells me it has low battery. There we go. Make sure this plugged in. Oh, I see what's going on. So local color, it's white, but it's also, in my experience, generally has this little yellow tinge to it, kind of off-white stuff going on. And let's see if that's working now. There we go. Just gotta like get it shifted around a bit. I think it's super wobbly. Okay, while that wobbles to normality, let's do this. There, we're coming into this anyway. So yeah, I've got white, I've got my white, I've got my blue that I normally am using in this limited palette. Maybe a little bit of green, maybe a little bit of yellow. Using a limited palette is it's interesting. It's a different thought process. Okay, so one really cool thing that I'm observing as I'm looking at this is that as a lot of these things move away from you, the pattern on it. So let's do this. I don't want to ruin anything. Right, so if I have a pattern that's like this, like these little dots, as the plane faces away, it goes from being rounds to being an oval in this direction. So you can, without very much else going on, having this kind of repeated pattern generically transferred everywhere, you can kind of tell what direction the plane is facing by how a circle is depicted. So super easy, but always interesting to kind of think about that stuff. So like these ones here, it's on this plane that's facing away. The minute, I'm going to darken it up a bit because it does not need to be that light. Here we go. Too dark. We're going to meet somewhere in the middle there. But the minute that it turns around and it's kind of facing us again, we get back to it's kind of more generic stuff going on. Yeah, this is good. So feel free to ask any questions if you have any. Let's have a look as we're doing this. I know that this is going to get into not being all that interesting in and of itself. So you guys got any questions about maybe about painting rocks or painting, I don't know. What's on your mind, guys? What is on your mind? So as I'm doing this, I'm also thinking about how can I accentuate maybe some of the movements that I've seen. I'm going to use the use what's going on, or see if I can get this even closer still. So you can see what's going on in these light patterns that I can, how do I accentuate it as it's coming down or communicate it even further or stuff. Yuma says, which paper do you use? I think I have this is a 120 pound. This might be a Strathmore. For some of my contract work, I've got an Arches paper, which is really nice. Really, really nice stuff. But for me, so long as it returns from being buckled, then it's all good. This stuff, when you use the bigger papers, it will always does a much better job of returning from being buckled. Oh, Skatey Gaming just followed. Thanks for joining. I hope you're doing well today. Okay, let's have a look. So one thing that I really like doing is looking in sort of what the paint is naturally done by itself. Because there tends to be a lot of like lead up and ramp down from that. So if I use it, say for example we've got this little round spot here. If I can accentuate that round spot and sort of use it to dictate what this rock is doing, then the paint has done half the painting for me. Skatey says, I found a tweet and here I am. Oh, I'm glad you found the tweet. I hope you're doing well. We are painting some rocks and trees. Boom, there it is. Oh yeah, painting some rocks and trees, and he says 120 gram. It's quite light. It might be a 200 something gram. I'm terrible at numbers. I really am. Let's have a look. So I'm going to provide like a little light edge along where this whole thing is naturally formed. Yumi says, me too. Made even worse by the fact that I'm an Australian in America. So my whole, whatever little grasp I had on numbers just got changed on me entirely. Yeah, so here we go. But yeah, using the forms that the paint naturally makes is this huge shortcut. Because one, it's a natural occurrence. I'm not just imitating nature. Like this thing already happened, is natural. I can use it to make the rest of what I'm doing feel natural. It's good stuff. There we go. Let's get some more of this. More of this moss and mold in there. See what variation the rest of this stuff has. Get in close. So I really would have loved it actually. I feel like some of this stuff that I already did, still too much of a high contrast. This is one of the hard parts of using gouache and poster color, is that there's the big value shift. And most of the time these days I can predict it, but sometimes, especially when I'm using white or a white in my mix, sometimes it catches up with me. So it's like I want these to be present if somebody's really looking for them, but I don't want it to get in the way of how you read this rock in the first place. Alright, that might be a bit better. Adriana says, the value shift really throws me off. Yep. It's a killer. But I can tell you most of the time these days, when I first started, it was tragic. Most of the time these days, it's embedded in my head, like it doesn't get me like it used to. But when I start to add a little more white to the mix, sometimes it does. Okay, we're coming up here. You know what, let's hit up that guy there. And I'm going to continue a little bit of this. Oh, hello. Up into this section. Not a great deal. I don't want us to look here all the time. But let's just get some noise. Okay, so that's nice. That's nice. Let's zoom out. Have a step back. Alright, now I'm going to get to some of these branches and stuff. I don't want to over-define them. But I do want them to make them... do want to make them feel like they fit into this scenario. Biggest thing I think I'm going to do for that is to make sure that whenever the planes are facing down, whenever the branches are facing down, they get some shadow. And if we need, sometimes when the branches are facing up, they get a little light highlight on the top. All this stuff helps. It's just basic communication. If I can get away with basic communication and not going too much further, then I'll be happy. Here we go. And now that I'm thinking with this tree, now that I've kind of got some degree of a pattern going on between these two trees where they're kind of veering off to the side, and I even have this one veering off to this side, I can kind of go for the same thing here. It's like, I don't know why it would be happening in these trees. I don't need to know why, but I can enjoy the pattern of it. And so just accentuate it just a little bit. Nice. Go a little bit in that guy. All right, so I feel like there's a bit more to do, but I want to leave it. I feel like there's only a little bit more I want to do in this, but I'm going to need to leave it to get my head straight. So I know that was a bit short today, but if you guys have any questions, now's the time to chat. If any of you are interested in learning to paint, feel free to head to my website. I've got some tutorials, or Patreon, or just hang out on Instagram. But otherwise, I think I'm going to head out. So thank you guys so much for joining. I'll see you on Tuesday. I'll be here on Tuesday, same time. The Flaming Glass says, do you answer questions on your Discord channel? In theory, I try to spend time on my Discord channel. I don't always do a good job of it, but I'm making it a resolution to do it. So yes, let me make sure I'm doing that.